Well, apparently this is it. I finally get to combine my two greatest loves: insane internet degenerates and laughing at the old politics community. Because recently I found myself on stream watching an old Wick TV panel regarding the ethics of carnal relations with animals.
Let me ask you a question. Okay, fuck this intro bullshit. Has anyone here fucked an animal, yes or no?
I'm curious too.
Count?
Has anyone on the panel fucked an animal, yes or no? Answer the fucking question. Everyone go round and answer. Go.
Now, to provide some context, that panel occurred mid-2023 when the Twitch politics community was very much mid-death spiral and came off the back of a girl who was banned off OnlyFans for making content with her dog. Importantly though, a topic like this that's sensitive, complicated, very disturbing, requires some form of expertise.
Sure.
Let the zoophile speak, please. So talk to us. What's going on?
Otters are hot. I could see
Have you ever
that.
have you had sex with any animals?
It's like Vaporeon.
I tasted a dog's penis once, but
How did it
How
taste?
did, how did it taste?
it
Yeah.
wasn't sexual.
However, watching that panel made me realise that this is far from the first time something like that happened in the Twitch politics community. Back in December of 2022, there was another panel with another expert, this time on the map community. But this expert isn't just some internet rando, they're somebody many of you will be very, very familiar with. Their online history has been quite well documented by multiple channels. And yet, I can't find any reference to this happening anywhere. So what I have for you today is the time that Hypnotist Safo joined the Twitch politics community, the following fallout, and also the never released interview Safo had with the host of that panel. Let's get into it.
I come on to speak about dog fucking. Everyone's bringing the vegan argument.
Between 17 and 20 active members of the zoosexual community.
Probably I have the mental capacity to go through the sex safe.
As much fucking science as you want on it, okay? I very much doubt you're going.
Before we get into this proper, I want to address one particular element of this story. The claim that Sappho appeared in Twitchpol at all. Now, even at the time, this was a little bit of a contested issue, so let's have a little scratch at it. By 2022, Sappho had pretty much lost their mind, and when we're looking at the person on the panel, someone going by the name Sapphic or Alexa.
Hello, my name is Sanguine Sapphic, and my name is Alexa.
Oh, I'm sorry, I mean Monica.
What is your preferred name, pronouns, and age?
Hi, yeah, I am, my name is Monica.
And the fact that Sapphic cannot even be consistent when talking to the same person makes me somewhat think that they might be lying to us. What we have here, at least in my opinion, is somebody who would make claims to D&D in their interview with him that they were friends with Sappho.
What is your relationship with Sappho classified as?
Close friends, I would say. You know, I wouldn't say it's much more than that. It could be more than that, but that's not for me to say.
While having very, very similar speech patterns and demeanours, the same proclivities, along with, as you'll see, the same unashamed boastfulness regarding their victims. We also have this at the end of the interview they have with the host of the panel.
Do you think that there's any major misconceptions about you or Sappho that you would like to correct?
I would rather not speak for Sappho. However, there is a misconception that I am some sort of troll, that I am being facetious or overly dramatic, or just wanting attention, or trying to be the next Sappho or whatever they're saying. But I can guarantee 100% that I am not imitating her. I am not trying to be her. Despite her, you know, being an inspiration, I'm not trying to be her. She's her own person and she's doing her own thing. She has her own YouTube channel. She has her own Twitter. she doesn't even go by Sappho anymore.
Which, when coupled with their Twitter bio claiming to have DID, very much makes me feel like I'm being toyed with. Now, is it possible that what we have here is a Sappho superfan? A liquid Sappho, you might say. That is, of course, a possibility. However, the idea of a Sappho copycat presents its own unique issues. The way this person handles themselves, it is abundantly clear that they are trying to obfuscate something. So, whether this is Sappho trying to disguise herself, or a friend of Sappho's standing in for her, given what this person is into and the fact that they are prepared to present themselves in exactly the same light and way as Sappho is, this video will accept that premise, and from here on out, I will be referring to them as Sappho. So first off, let's start with who Hypnotist Sappho is, for those of you who are somehow blissfully unaware. Now, I don't want to spend a massive amount of time on this section, partly because in my opinion, the Cliff Notes version is all we need and very, very simple to boil down. So I'm going to shamelessly copy the homework of Lanza, who has a pretty extensive series on Sappho, and if you want to know more about them for whatever reason, that's where I'd go to look. Sappho's history online has been extensively picked apart over the years, though they first came to the attention of the public around 2021. Sappho would release a video titled Coming Out About Things, where she would address her interests in animals. Now this video is an absolute trip, as Sappho explains to us how zoophiles, much like gay people in the past, are just an oppressed minority. And this would begin a trend with Sappho of her activism to normalize bestiality. But of course, like many of these freaks, Sappho didn't just have one interest. In fact, Sappho's other interests are somehow even more concerning, because Sappho has an attraction to minors.
Sappho admitted to being attracted to some minors and is maybe a MAP, or minor attracted person. We're not confirming nor denying it. She would make a bunch of nonsensical posts about age of consent laws and attraction and a whole bunch of other stuff, then basically confirms it, saying she's attracted to some.
One thing about Sappho, and people like her, that's always tickled the morbid side of my curiosity, is the way degenerates like this try to garner sympathy. We'll see some of these tactics used when we go over the panel itself, but to give some examples of the sort of thing we're looking at, Sappho and others work to try and play on people's emotional weaknesses. This can take on a range of different tactics. In one case, Sappho would tell a story of her relationship with her childhood pets. Now I want to note here that Sappho is a bit of a pathological liar, so any information she does present about herself probably can't be trusted, especially when she is trying to manipulate you.
We had 2 golden Labrador retrievers that I would go and cuddle up with and fall asleep with, and just, they ended up being my place of safety and comfort and warmth.
Now obviously, any sane, normal human being will not be taken in by such blatant emotional manipulation when somebody is trying to persuade you that sex with animals and minors is completely normal. And yet, this hasn't just worked once, it's worked twice! With both Naya Okami, who some of you may recognise as the wolf person from the Therian documentary in 2013, and former pedophile hunter Coyote Lovely, moving from detractors of Sappho to striking up relationships with her. Now, I'm not going to go deep into the lore of these people. The only reason I bring them up is because I want to show you how Sappho works. And fortunately, I can do that in detail because Sappho also tried to do this to Lanza.
The person of the hour would message me on Telegram herself, trying to somehow shift things onto Ziarkalo and apologize for the stuff back in her chat. I wasn't falling for any of that shit, and she would tell me she's estranged from her family, and then go on about how she's dating the 14-year-old and would wait any amount of time for them. I would call her scum and delusional, and she would say that love happens unexpectedly, blah blah blah, trying to justify dating a 14-year-old. She says she's going to church and might come back to the limelight as a preacher one day. I talk more shit to her and her delusions. And then she would try to flirt with me for some reason to no avail, because unlike the children she talks to, I'm an adult who can see past these poor attempts at manipulation and see her for who she truly is. She's really fucking weird, sending me cute cat gifts to try and conversate or whatever with me, when all she's doing is giving me content to use for this video.
So obviously, flirting with your detractors to deflect from their detractions is only going to work on those detractors who are mentally stunted. So what's Sappho to do when she comes across people who aren't quite that dumb, but are sorta close? Well, that brings us nicely to the politics community in 2022. Now, that particular community is one that would essentially debate any topic, and there are reams of clips of people like Vosh and Destiny discussing paedophilia, lolicon, or whatever the rape cage of the day happens to be. To provide a bit of context, Twitch Politics of 2022 was not a particularly happy space. Two things occurred earlier in the year which affected the viewership of many of the streamers involved. Firstly, the COVID-19 pandemic had largely been wrapped up by this point, and the space could attribute a lot of its growth to the lockdowns. Streamers who'd garnered audiences which, shall we say, were disproportionate to their actual levels of talent found their viewership rapidly decline as people found literally anything else to do with their time. The other hit to that community would come in March of the year when Destiny found himself banned from Twitch. Now this had a couple of effects. Firstly, streamers who relied upon Destiny for their viewership found that he can no longer raid them, which killed off a fair amount of the waiting room and after show type streamers. But perhaps more devastating, particularly for the streamers who hosted panels as their primary content, Destiny, who was by far the biggest draw, could no longer be shown on Twitch. The moderation rules on Twitch mean that if a creator is banned, you can no longer show their content on the platform. And you certainly weren't able to platform them on your channel, which left streamers with a difficult choice. Either abandon the channels that they've been growing for the last couple of years on Twitch and chance it on YouTube, or stick it out on Twitch with a roster of glub shittos no one cared about. In some ways, this silver age of Twitchpol produced some of the most entertaining content from that community. As panels moved from people seriously debating political topics, to people looking to create more insane or controversial content in hope of garnering an audience rather than leeching off bigger creators. By the end of 2022, when we get to things like the pedophile panel, content had become tailored more to creating things that could be reacted to by other streamers, particularly people like Chud Logic. Now, most of the old Twitchpol streamers are long gone. They either couldn't survive the move from Twitch to YouTube, or they couldn't garner audiences of their own outside of Destiny's influence. However, for the purposes of this video, there are a couple of notable exceptions of people who are still kicking around, as it were. When most people think of Twitchpol survivors, they're going to think of Chud, though he is very much the outlier, and not just because his streams provided a filter for people who couldn't take being mocked online. But as we get into the panel, we can see a few familiar faces. For example, Wick TV, along with Tomfoolery and Rose Malay. And one of the VODs I'm using for this, ironically, comes from Elderdrazi. All of these people I have talked about on this channel within the last 6 months. However, to the best of my knowledge, the rest of this Rose gallery have very much departed content creation. That being said, let's focus in on 3 particular people. Firstly, it's D&D. This person was the host of the panel and was contacted by Safo asking to be included. Next, and obviously, Sappho herself, along with Exeme, who Sappho wanted to bring along for moral support of some kind. Their relevance, I'm sad to say, will become abundantly clear to you. Of course, I don't want to steal anyone's thunder, so let's hear some of the circus introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Sanguine Sapphic, and I am a pro-map as well as a zoophile.
I am Siren's Verse. I've been in the zoo community for a year now.
Hello, I'm Zine. I am a AAM and map supporter. I've been involved in the community about 5 years.
Now you may have noticed that Zeem's audio is terrible in their introduction, so allow me to fill in the gaps. Though I would like to note that if you ever find yourself on some sort of political discussion panel involving pedophilia, maybe it would be helpful right from the off that if somebody in their introduction cannot be heard properly, you might want to get them to clarify. Irregardless, Zeem explains that they are an AAM. An AAM is an adult attracted minor, And now you're beginning to see why this panel in particular may be so controversial. Despite the topic, a panel like this is going to feel very familiar to anyone who's ever seen a political panel. Both sides go back and forth trying to persuade their opponents and indeed the audience that their position is the correct one. This basically serves as a 2-hour-long, very slow car crash before the car hits a wall and bursts into flames. However, in that period, there are a couple of conversations which I think it's worth highlighting. To begin with, WIC TV would make an impassioned statement about the issues surrounding consent.
The problem with being attracted or wanting to pursue relationships with minors is because they cannot consent. That is the heart of the issue.
Unfortunately for WIC, he wasn't prepared for the staggering intellect of Sappho, who hits back with a watertight and logically sound argument.
On that topic, I don't see where you draw the line of consent. I think 13 is a perfectly reasonable age for them to be able to consent. I mean, at 13, you can have a Twitter, you can have a Discord, you could interact with so many people, and you can do all of these things.
That's not having sex. That's not having sex.
That's not having sex. That's not having sex. Strong words, WIC. But have you considered that Discord can be traumatic?
Using Discord is a pretty high risk of trauma in general, and yet 13-year-olds are allowed to do that. I feel like, there's a lot of dangerous things that you could get into on Discord, and that's not overtly sexual, that's just in general. You can get into a random gore server, and, these saying, oh, they're 18 is ridiculous. It's not a deterrent. Minors will lie if you tell them no.
Somehow from here, the conversation actually manages to become slightly more insane, as the pro-map side of the panel begin attempting to woke scold WIC into accepting cultural paedophilia. These Reddit tier tactics are pretty bizarre to behold, but are a perfect example of how some of these freaks try to pull on the emotional strings of a person to get them to concede points. After all, you may be against paedophilia, but do you really want to be bigoted about it?
There's a level of 14-year-olds, no matter where you live, no matter how you're raised, no matter what culture you are from, 14-year-olds cannot consent.
In America.
Anywhere.
Where's your proof for that?
I don't know what it is about the politics space or debate spaces in general that allows people to have the self-confidence to publicly ask somebody on a panel to cite their sources that 14-year-olds can't consent. And before I get the debate bros breathing down my neck about evidencing your position, I'd like to note that there is no evidence you can give somebody like Sappho that is going to get her to concede, because once again, her only goal here is to manipulate the people around her to further push an agenda. The goal here, of course, is not to find good sources or provide information to an audience. The goal is to find pressure points which can be applied to your opposition. Not to attack their arguments, but to attack them as people. For example, attempting to cast doubt on their knowledge, or as we can see here, their compassion.
Okay, but when someone from that culture is expressing their opinions and saying, hey, this is what I've experienced, and I think that this is, perfectly fine, I think we need to have a little bit more understanding of, hey, yeah, they just come from a different culture than we do. Let's have a little bit more understanding and compassion for that experience. Rather than...
Sappho and people like her take an obscene glee in conversations like this. The public elements of it are major driving factors in the way that Sappho acts, and we're about to see just how far she is willing to take that. Now this next section I'm gonna let play in full, as we finally get to hear the opinions of Zeem. And for those of you who've been paying attention, I think you can guess how this is going to go.
Goes, oh, this is traumatic. 100% of the time. It's always going to be traumatic. I'm 16. If I want to flirt with a 20-some-year-old, I can. If I want to have sex with one, I can. That is my right, and I'm conscious of that being what I, as a person, want to do. That is what I should have that right. I'm consciously able to make that decision. I have made it clear by being here, by stating my opinions, by making my arguments. I should be able to love, date, do whatever the fuck I want if I'm if I'm mentally capable of, which I clearly am. I'm not saying everybody is. That's never been the statement.
Hold on. I'm really sorry. Hold on.
One second.
Did you just say? Wait, did he just say 16?
Let him finish.
No. Hold on. Did he just say he's 16? Is he actually 16?
Wait.
Yes, this person is 16 years old.
At this point, as you'd probably expect, the panel descends into chaos, with its membership trying to work out exactly why they'd been debating pedophilia with a 16-year-old. A question, as it turns out, quite a few other people also wanted an answer to. Twitchpol would quickly begin digging through as much information as they could get their hands on to try and piece together the events that had led to this absolute shit show. Here, there are a couple of key streams, one of which is unsurprisingly from Chud Logic. Chud managed to get his hands on the DMs between D&D and Sappho. This was particularly unfortunate for D&D because Sappho had openly told him that they wanted to bring an AAM on, and he basically said this was fine as long as they were 16 or above. Of course, he'd neglected to inform any of the panelists about this. Likely because no matter how insane many of the streamers within Twitchpol actually were, very few of them were quite this dumb. The stream then moves to a call-in show of some of the people involved, Wick and Tomfoolery in particular, but more importantly D&D himself phones in. But by this point the level of actual absurdity had largely become clear. With a bit of digging on Twitter, people had worked out that the person Sappho had brought on with them was one of the people they had been grooming for the last year or two. Which means D&D hadn't just brought on a 16-year-old to debate pedophilia, D&D had brought on a grooming victim to defend their groomer. The other Twitchpoler in question is Zonya. Zonya's stream was largely going over the events of the panels, the other conversations that had occurred around them, while also looking into the possibility of going after the servers where these freaks were hanging out. This stream involved a lot of call-ins from the glub shito variety of the community, and here I can introduce to you the final irrelevant player in this ridiculous story. Which unfortunately would be me. Back then, I was a tiny 5-viewer Twitch Andy. I was incredibly soy, a terrible streamer, insufferably long-winded, and never knew quite when to shut the fuck up. But being honest, about 70% of that is still true today. Nevertheless, I did manage to get D&D to come on my stream, where I proceeded to rip into him for multiple hours and advised him to delete his channel. He did agree to do this, recognizing the whole thing as quite the fuck up, but he left me a parting gift, the interview he had with Sappho. And this piece of absurd lost media would sit at the bottom of my downloads folder for about 2.5 years, until about a month ago when I was cleaning it out and discovered it. I then moved it to my archival folder and forgot about it again. So for those of you wondering why Jenny does all the back-end research and planning our projects, hopefully this gives you a better picture of my organizational skills. But as this story comes full circle, so does this video, and watching Wick's Dogfucker panel reminded me of its existence. Now rather than just let it rot, I thought it would be best to actually just release the fucking thing. D&D's original intention was a 3-part series on the zoophile and map communities. He expected, according to Tomfoolery, hundreds of thousands of views for this. I doubt this was the video he was planning, but at least in the end, this interview is going to see the light of day. As for Twitchpol, and for those of you wondering, well, firstly, Twitchpol is very much dead at this point, and secondly, no one learned a damn thing from this. This particular hellscape of a panel did little to dissuade people from debating this particular topic, and didn't really even dissuade anybody from bringing these sort of people onto their shows in the future, with food shops interviewing a virtuous pedophile in late 2023. Then again, and for people who don't know, partly just because I like highlighting it, Food Shops is a self-confessed lolicon who suffers from POCD. Her particular defense being that she was told by her therapist to watch Lolicon to prove to herself that she wasn't a pedophile. But that's probably a video for another day. So with that, I'll leave you with the full uncut interview between It's D&D and Sappho. My apologies for cucking the content for 2.5 years. Thanks as always to all of our subscribers and all of our channel members, particularly those at molding level, Dr. Zeus Hippo, Based Hoz, Stationary Name, Hey It's Lissy, and Star Sprinter. Don't forget to bitch to me about whatever happens to be on your mind in my comments section, and as always, more content on its way. Peace.
Hello, everyone. Today we're interviewing Sanguine Sappho, one of Hypnotist Sappho's friends and I believe associates. I don't know what else you would consider yourself, but yeah, with that all being said, I'll do a better intro whenever I throw this in an editor. I don't care about this, it's just placeholder, whatever. With that all being said, let's dive into the interview. So, what is your preferred name, pronouns, and age?
Hi, yeah, I am, my name is Monica. I am she/her, female pronouns, and I'm 23 years old.
Alrighty, so what is your relationship with Sappho classified as?
Close friends, I would say. You know, I wouldn't say it's much more than that. It could be more than that, but that's not for me to say.
Okay, so you have a friendship with Hypnotist Sappho. Did you know her in real life, or were you drawn to her by the controversy that happened about a year ago at this point?
I've known her since before the controversy, even before she went by the name Sappho. So I've known her for quite a long time, compared to most people.
Alright, so when you first met Sappho, was she open about the beliefs that later made her controversial or infamous?
Vaguely. She wasn't. She would hint about it. She wouldn't like openly state it or anything, but you know, in private she'd talk about it, or she'd make like, you know, cheeky hints towards it.
Alrighty. Okay, so I guess let's start diving into the meat and potatoes of this conversation. What exactly are your beliefs in relation to zoophilia?
Well, I believe that it is perfectly acceptable in theory and within the realistic practical limits. So, basically, there are wrong ways to do it and harmful ways to do it. But I believe that there are right ways to do it and ways that you can do it and it not be harmful or abusive or anything like that.
Alright, so do you have any, like, major differences with either the moral or biological aspects that could be associated with zoophilia that differ from Sappho?
Well, as much as long as I've known her, we haven't actually had that long of a talk about her beliefs, and I'm not exactly following her every you know, belief that she has on it, so I can't speak to her opinions and how they differ from mine.
Are there any major
But
opinions that are, like, well, very well publicly known that you disagree with? I know some of the people I've interviewed who were like friendly with Sappho back when she was like infamous for those Twitter spaces and stuff have said they like differ from her currently on like contact and stuff. Where do you lie on all those kinds of spectrums?
well, I am pro contact, so I believe that it is okay to, you know, have physical contact with animals as long as it isn't physically or mentally harming the animals. And, you know, as long as it's consensual to the point that you can get consensual with an animal. And, you know, that's a whole other topic about, you know, can animals consent and such. But, you know, I believe that they can.
What are your principles for understanding consent?
Well, consent is the agreement of, or mutual agreement of an action. So, if you can reach a mutual agreement with your animal, and agreement is something that you can be clearly defined both physically and verbally, and not just verbally, but also physically. So, you can have, a physical agreement where, you nod, that's a physical agreement. Animals can nod as well, and, general positive yes type physical characteristics work as consent.
Can a standard that we would apply to humans with our understanding of like language or body language be applied to animals then, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that body language is very universal in a lot of ways. I mean, there are obviously some certain aspects that are lost between translation, but, generally, like quick movements are more violent, or, softer, gentler movements are friendly type of thing.
All right. So, do you happen to have any? Do you happen to have any like moral basis as well for like your acceptance or support of zoophilia? Is there any like moral arguments that you rely on when discussing or talking about your beliefs?
Well, I think that, people, like, vegetarians, they say, oh, you kill animals and all that. And that's wrong. But, like, if it's wrong for zoophilia, if zoophilia is wrong, then killing animals is obviously wrong as well, because, you know, these are two things that are not on the same level in my mind. I think that physical romance and killing, literal death, are two different levels, and death, of course, being the worst thing. So I believe that we do much worse things to animals than that, which, not all zoophilia is necessarily good by basis, but there is good zoophilia.
All right, so I know. Let's go to the most common the most common animal zoophiles talk about, which is a dog, right? Biologically, there is a heavy risk to both male and female dogs' genitalias, as well as potential damage to their ribs from any type of penetrative sex. Would you say that that is a risk that is okay, given that people can also experience injuries in a similar vein, or do you think that there is a significant difference there?
I think it's the same as, people are getting injuries in a similar fashion. You just have to make sure that you're more compatible physically. And, this goes for people as well. If your partner is a lot smaller than you, then, you could really hurt them. Or if your partner's bigger than you, you could get hurt by them. And, the same goes for interspecies.
Okay, so then would you say that there is nothing immoral about zoophilia? You believe it is fully morally justifiable to you? Or are there like cases in which it is immoral? Where do you draw the line?
So, I think that, as with any relationship or any physical contact, there is ways to abuse it, and so there is not always a clean moral standing with zoophilia. So there are, people who will do bad things, like, hurt animals or even kill them to pleasure themselves with them. And
Zoosadism specifically?
yeah, that zoo necrophilia, stuff like that.
So you think that there are you think there are limits at which it's no longer moral because you believe that the harm to the animal is greater than one you're willing to accept?
Yeah, and
or a potential harm to the animal. Sorry, I don't want to use like a loaded terminology here.
Yeah, the potential harm is too great for me to condone those things, because there are obviously ways of getting dead animals like that died naturally, and then what happens to the body after that isn't really, in my mind, after you're dead, flesh is just flesh, and flesh is an object, but when things are living, they have a more sacred value to them.
Okay, so then I'm going to sort of push you on this point then. When it comes to, like, I don't know, say there was an animal that passed away naturally and Necrozoo, right, wanted to use that carcass, right? Do you find that morally reprehensible or no?
I find it emotionally, but not morally reprehensible. So personally, I find it reprehensible, but it's not something that I'm willing to attack, harass, or, otherwise punish anyone for doing. So it's not something that I would condone or support, but it's not something that I would attack or shame.
Do you believe that there's any? Do you believe that there's any limit to? Okay, how do I best word? Okay, do you believe that there's any limit that you can draw then when it comes to something being morally reprehensible? Because from what I'm understanding, your moral framework is that morality is completely subjective, and most people can determine what they themselves would think is moral. Is there any sort of universal standard of morality or any sort of like action that you believe is universally morally reprehensible?
So I feel that there is no true universally morally reprehensible action that you could perform. Something like causing pain to others isn't really something that I could be morally against, because it's pain is blind and it doesn't really care. So it doesn't matter in that case, because morals are also blind.
So you think that everything is, in some regards, morally neutral then, right?
Yeah, I believe that everything in some regards is morally neutral.
All right, so you are essentially what people would call a moral subjectivist then. Interesting. So I guess sort of a question I have is what led you to having this ideology surrounding zoophilia? Was this something that was present before Sappho was public about it, or was it something that you found out during or after she came out about it?
So I've had my opinions on this for a very long time. I've actually held these opinions since about 2017. I came to them through my own study, my own views of the world, and my own morals. And I've expressed them personally throughout the years with varying levels of acceptance through myself, because I have had trouble in the past accepting, who I am and what I do and all that stuff, standard stuff. But now I just want to accept myself for what I believe and what I think, and I want other people to accept themselves as well, especially if they hold similar viewpoints to me. They don't have to, but it helps. It really does.
Do you believe that zoophilia needs to be no longer something that is demonized so that you can come to, so that you and the other zoos within your communities can come out and be public about their wants and desires, and also maybe so that there can be like safer practices that are more normalized?
Yeah, I feel that generally people will always find something to hate, and so if it's not this, it's going to be something else. So we might as well stand up and, let people know that we exist, that this is a real thing, and that, you know, of course, safe practices, spreading safe practices, doing all that sort of stuff is a big part of it. But it's mostly about awareness for people who might find themselves being dejected because if they open up about this to anyone, they're either called weird, a freak, disgusting, told to hurt themselves, and all that stuff. And it's really not needed. It's not, I think, appropriate to treat somebody that way for just having this difference in their mind where they think differently and they can't help it.
All right, so we're going to transition into the second wave of questions that I have for you that relate to your other controversial position. But before we do that, I'm going to sort of ask a transitionary question. So, do you believe that minors being within the zoophilia community is dangerous? If so, why? If not, why not? And then also, do you support minors actively engaging in pro-contact practices within the zoophilia community?
So, the thing about minors is, especially these days, they are all overly engaged in a lot of activities that I feel that they shouldn't be engaged in. However, it's their choice, and they're going to do it whether we tell them not to, whether we say it's bad or it's good or whatever. So I'd rather make it as safe as place as possible because if you welcome them in, then they'll feel comfortable and safe and they'll tell you openly who they are and what they are. But if you deject them and harass them, they'll start lying about what they are and who they are. They'll start lying about their age and they'll get in anyways. And it'll be a lot more dangerous because people will start to take advantage of them.
But don't you think that people already do within the zoophilic community? There's lots of kids on Twitter who claim that they sort of got pulled in because it looked interesting, they were welcome, they felt like they were treated the same as an adult, and then all of a sudden they're sort of forcing themselves to participate or partake in a behavior that they otherwise would not have. Do you think that that's a danger at all, or do you think that's overblown?
I think it's very overblown considering the fact that I have not personally experienced any of their people telling people to engage in certain activities such as zoophilia. In fact, in the communities that I've been involved in, mostly ones surrounding Sappho, it has been extremely moderated in that way, where people have been looking out for the safety of them and making sure that they're not forced into any paraphilic activities. So I believe that as long as a space is well moderated, then it can be extremely safe.
Do you think that there's any level of danger to the kids at all, or to minors?
I don't see the danger, no.
Alrighty. Alright, so then I guess let's transition to your other controversial thing. From what I understand, you're a map, correct?
Yes.
Okay, can you explain what that is to me and to what extent you hold those values?
So, to me, a minor attracted person would be anyone who is attracted to someone who is under the current age of consent, which would be declared as a minor. And in my mind, that is anyone above the age of 13. Anything below that I consider inappropriate. If they're not allowed to use the internet, then I think it's not really a good idea, because romantically they are not developed enough.
All right, so
below the age of 13.
So, is there anything? Okay, I guess let's start here. Are you pro contact or no with map stuff?
That is dependent on their age.
Within the framework of what you laid out, would you be pro contact or no?
No.
Okay. What is the limitation in which you would? Is there any like circumstances in which you are or would be pro contact?
It honestly depends on their development and their wellness and exposure to anything like that. However, I generally would say that sexual contact is not appropriate.
So, okay, so I'm familiar with some map arguments, and a lot of them use conflicting standards amongst different countries. Do you believe there's any standard held by a particular country that sets the age of consent at the perfect time, or do you think that it is dependent case by case, in which some people might, in your opinion, be able to consent at 14 and some might not be able to till they're like, I don't know, 30?
I believe it is entirely case by case because of the fact that people mature differently. Some people mature extremely rapidly. You know, you see 14-year-olds that you might mistake for being 18 or 20 even. But then there are other 14-year-olds who are very quite clearly 14-year-olds. And it all depends on that development and that progress that they make. I think that, you know, mental capabilities should determine if you can do stuff like that. Because that's what they're saying you need to do stuff like that. They say you need to have the mental capability to consent, but then they don't define what that mental capability is other than an age. You could very well have a 25-year-old person who has the mind of a 13-year-old and shouldn't be able to consent, but they can because law? Question mark. And it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, is there a standard for which you believe is capability to consent? Does it have to do with IQ? Does it have to do with brainstem development? Where do you put that line for state of maturity?
Well, for sexual acts, it's the sexual maturity that matters. And the understanding of that sexual maturity.
Okay, can you define sexual maturity for me? Because for some people, they would define it as a purely biological, like if you can, like, you know, sexually perform, right? Some people would define that as sexually mature. Others define it as a mental state. Where do you define it?
I would define it as a combination of both. You can be physiologically under sexually developed due to a hormone condition, but that also, the hormone condition also affects your brain and how it develops and understands things. So it's really a very complicated and nuanced problem because there are so many interlocking and interweaving connected facts and, you know, different varieties of problems. So you could be in one day or in one way sexually able to perform things physically but not mentally. But you know, I feel like that isn't okay. But then the opposite wouldn't be okay either.
Okay, so I guess now we're going to get into the questions. If you don't want to answer these, that's a-okay with me. But so, have you engaged in any zoophilic acts in person? If so, do you want to explain what they are? You don't have to answer. It's perfectly fine if you don't.
I would prefer not to answer.
All right. Then I'm going to ask the same. Have you engaged sexually or romantically with minors at any point after becoming a legal adult? You can say no comment if you don't want to answer. It's perfectly okay.
Well, this answer is sort of complicated because the definition of minor has different meanings in different places. So,
If you're
you know, a
from the
minor
US,
could be
would it meet the standard for a minor where you are?
federally or state level.
State level, because I don't think the federal government can arrest you for doing something within your state as long as it's legal according to state law. I might be wrong there, though.
Then romantically, yes. Sexually, no.
Okay. If we were to set it to the federal law standard, would that answer change?
No.
Alrighty. And then, okay, so the final question I have, for those people who criticize both yourself, Hypnotist Sappho, your partner, whoever it might be, what do you have to say to those who are so vehemently anti your belief?
To the people who genuinely have nothing better to do in their lives than to hate on somebody who is just trying to spread more love and help and generally try and be helpful to people. I don't understand why it matters so much to you. I find things morally reprehensible that you might not find, but I do not go on long crusades about how you guys should hurt yourselves or command violence towards these people, because you need to be more accepting as well as understanding of other people, especially if it's not hurting anyone and it is a net positive in the universe in terms of love and happiness. Because a lot of people just want to hurt. They just want to hurt other people and cause pain and tell them to hurt themselves. And that is probably the most disgusting thing a human could do, in my opinion.
Do you think that there's any major misconceptions about you or Sappho that you would like to correct?
I would rather not speak for Sappho. However, there is a a misconception that I am some sort of troll, that I am being facetious or overly dramatic, or just wanting attention or trying to be the next Sappho or whatever they're saying. But I can guarantee 100% that I am not imitating her. I am not trying to be her. Despite her, you know, being an inspiration, I'm not trying to be her. She's her own person and she's doing her own thing. She has her own YouTube channel, she has her own Twitter. She doesn't even go by Sappho anymore. And she's moving on. I am just trying to be, you know, somebody who you can stand next to. You know, a lot of this world is afraid to do the things that they think about doing, and that's because they don't see other people doing them. And it's a human condition where you think, nobody's standing over there, I probably shouldn't be standing over there. But I took the step forward and stood there so that others can stand next to me and be proud of who they are.
Alright, and finally, where can people find you if they want to interact with you, if they have questions, comments, concerns? Where would you want people to contact you?
Well, of course, there's my Twitter, which is Sanguine Sappho. Then on my Twitter, I have a Discord link that I'm trying to maintain. It's not permanent, so it goes down sometimes, but I keep a Discord link there, so you can always message me. I'm thinking about starting a Discord server, but in the past, my Discord servers have led to a lot of people getting banned, myself included. So I've been trying to stay out of that. I do have Telegram. I have mostly Telegram, Twitter, Discord. Any three of those work, and my DMs are always open, and I'll gladly talk to you on any three of the platforms.
Alrighty, thank you so much for this interview. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.